The bread was wrong. That's the detail that started everything, the one that should not have been true. A loaf of black rye, dense as a river stone, sitting crooked in the hands of a man whose hands were clearly not accustomed to holding anything so ordinary. He was turning it over, slowly, like he was trying to solve it. Yvain watched him from 3 stalls down. She had her own work. The morning rush at Peller's Cross was already thickening. The narrow lane between the dye merchant and the spice woman filling with elbows and baskets, and the particular noise a market makes when everyone wants something, and no one wants to pay for it. She had 12 bundles of dried lavender to sell before the heat ruined the scent, a cloth purse with 4 coins in it, and a mother at home with a swollen ankle that hadn't healed right in 6 weeks. She did not have time to watch a stranger fumble with bread. She watched him anyway. The hood was pulled low, not unusual in autumn, not when the morning air off the Corrith River still had teeth in it. But the hood was made of something that caught the light differently than the rough wool everyone else wore. A darker weight. Stitched tighter. The kind of fabric that doesn't fray at the edges because it has never been washed in a bucket. He set the bread down, picked it up, set it down again. The vendor, Aldrich, red-nosed, missing the tip of his left thumb from a childhood accident with a millstone, leaned across the stall and said something Yvain couldn't hear. The hooded man looked up briefly, then back down at the loaf. He picked it up a 3rd time. He was holding it with both hands now. The way you'd hold something you were uncertain was real. Yvain pressed her lips together. She should not laugh. This was a stranger. A grown man, clearly capable of buying bread if he could afford that hood, clearly not someone who needed her amusement, added to whatever small confusion was already plaguing his morning. She knew all of this. She laughed anyway. It came out before she could stop it. A quick, involuntary sound, more exhale than anything else, the kind of laugh that is really just surprise escaping through your nose. But it was enough. Aldrich heard it. 2 women passing with a cart of onions heard it. And the hooded man, he heard it. He went very still. That was the first thing she noticed when she should have been looking away. The stillness. Not the stiffness of someone embarrassed. Not the bristle of someone offended. Something else. Something that moved from his hands upward and settled somewhere in his shoulders. The way an animal goes quiet when it hears something unfamiliar and has not yet decided what to do. Then he turned. She caught a glimpse of a jaw. Strong, shaved close enough that the morning light caught the grain of it. And then, below the jaw, curving from beneath his left ear all the way to the corner of his mouth. A scar. Not a small one. Not the kind that fades to silver and sits quietly. This was a scar that had been made by something deliberate, and survived, in spite of everything, a pale ridge pressed into the skin like a seam in old leather. It did not make him ugly. She would think about that for days afterward. The fact that it did not make him ugly at all, and the fact that she had noticed that so quickly, and what that meant about her. She stopped laughing. The man held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. She counted, because she needed something to do with her brain. Then he looked back at the bread. He set 3 silver marks on Aldrich's counter, 3, for a loaf that cost 1, without hesitation, without looking at the coins, and he walked away, deeper into the market, gone. Aldrich stared at the silver. He picked up 1 coin and bit it. He looked at Yvain. "Who?" he said. "Was that?" She shook her head. She had no idea. What she had, and would not admit to anyone for several weeks, was the feeling of the laugh, still sitting in her chest, curdled now into something that was not quite guilt, but lived in the same neighborhood. She went back to her lavender. The morning passed. She sold 9 of the 12 bundles, which was better than she'd expected, and haggled a half-price bottle of willow bark tincture from the apothecary 2 stalls, over for her mother's ankle, and ate her midday meal standing up. A heel of bread and a hard-boiled egg, with the particular efficiency of someone who has been eating standing up for most of her 22 years. She told herself she wasn't thinking about the hooded man. She was thinking about the hooded man. Not about the scar, specifically. About the stillness. The way he had gone quiet at her laugh, the way you go quiet at something that surprises you into paying attention. She had laughed at men before. Market life produced abundant material, and none of them had reacted like that. They got red. They got stiff. They made a show of ignoring her, or a show of not ignoring her. This man had simply paused. Like her laugh was a sound he was trying to place. Like it was something he had heard about, but not encountered. Which was a strange thing to think about a stranger. She filed it away. She did not expect to see him again. He was back the next morning, same stall, same bread, same hood. Aldrich spotted him first and gave Yvain a look that managed to communicate both commercial excitement and personal alarm in a single lift of his remaining eyebrows. The man wasn't fumbling this time. He stood at the counter with his arms loosely at his sides, and he was looking in the direction of Yvain's stall with a directness that should have felt rude and somehow didn't. It felt, instead, like a question. Yvain straightened her bundles. She was not going to acknowledge him. He had every right to buy his bread here. This was a public market. She was going to be perfectly professional and completely unaffected. "You're back," she said, loudly, across the lane. He turned. "I am." 2 words, unhurried. A voice that came from somewhere lower than she expected. Not a shout, not a performance, just a voice that assumed it would be heard and was. "Did you figure out the bread?" she asked. A pause. Then, and this was what she would remember, a small, almost imperceptible shift at the corner of his mouth, the scarred side. It didn't reach a smile. It thought about it. "I'm working on it," he said. She should have left it there. She had a full morning of sales ahead of her, and no particular reason to engage a hooded stranger who paid 3 times the asking price for rye and apparently needed multiple sessions to understand grain-based commerce. She was aware of all of this. "It's bread," she said. "It's not a negotiation." This time the shift reached a smile, small, contained, like a thing he was not entirely certain he was allowed. He bought the bread. He left. And Yvain turned back to her lavender with the distinct, unsettling sensation of having won an exchange she hadn't meant to enter. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful. Because it is easy to tell it wrong. Easy to frame those mornings as a courtship, as something that had an inevitable direction from the beginning. They didn't feel that way from inside them. From inside, they felt like friction, the good kind. The kind between 2 pieces of flint that haven't decided yet whether to spark. She didn't know what he was. He knew exactly what she was. And that asymmetry, as much as the laughter, as much as the scar, was what made the whole thing burn slow and clean the way it did. He came back 11 more times. Not every day. That was the detail that undid her, a little. If he had come every day, she could have categorized it, given it a shape she recognized. Instead, he appeared in a pattern she couldn't crack. 2 days running, then 4 days absent, then 1 day, then 6 days absent, then 3 in a row. There was no logic in it she could find, and she looked for one. Because Yvain was not a person who was comfortable not understanding the logic of things. She had grown up in a market. She understood exchange. She understood reciprocity and value, and the particular mathematics of scarcity. This man was not operating by any mathematics she knew. On the 8th visit, he came to her stall directly. Not to Aldrich. To her. He stood at the edge of the stall without touching anything, which was in itself a small courtesy she noticed. Most people handled the bundles immediately, pinching the dried heads to check the scent, which was both understandable and destructive, and she had very little patience for it. He looked at the lavender, and he looked at her and he said, "What else do you sell?" "What do you need?" she said. "I don't know yet." She studied him. Up close, the hood's shadow fell differently. She could see more of the scar from this angle, the full length of it, the way it pulled slightly at the skin just below his ear. She could see that his hands, braced on the edge of the counter, had more than one smaller scar across the knuckles. Not the scars of a man who fights carelessly, the scars of a man who trains, every day, with someone who doesn't hold back. "That's a difficult thing to shop for," she said. "I know." He picked up a bundle of lavender, carefully, by the stem, the way she would have wanted him to, and held it for a moment. He did not sniff it like most people did, with that exaggerated inhale that was more performance than sense. He just held it near enough that the scent would come to him on its own. "This is for sleep," he said. "Or grief, I forget which." She blinked. "Both, usually." He set the bundle down, put 2 coins on the counter, the correct amount, exactly, she noted, and stepped back. "I'll take it," he said. "It works better if you put it near the pillow," she said, and then felt immediately foolish for saying it, because he was clearly a grown adult who did not need pillow instructions. He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said again, and there was something in it this time, not unkind, not dismissive, something that sat closer to sad than either of those things. And she didn't know what to do with that, so she handed him the bundle and made correct change from his 2 coins, and watched him walk back into the market crowd. She put her hands flat on the counter. She stood there for a moment in the particular way of someone who has just processed something and hasn't quite caught up with what it was. Her palms were warm against the wood. Across the lane, Aldrich was watching her with an expression that could charitably be called interested. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything," he said. "Don't," she said again. Now, this is the place where the story most people would tell you goes wrong. Because this is the place where most people would say, she was falling for him. And that is too simple. Too clean. Ivane was not a person who fell for things cleanly. She had a mother with a bad ankle and 4 coins in a purse that needed to be 7 by end of month and 12 lavender bundles and an absolute ironclad, non-negotiable commitment to not being a fool. She was interested. That's the honest word for it. She was interested in a way that made her annoyed at herself, which is a particular kind of interest that has real teeth. So when he failed to appear for 4 days, she noticed. She worked harder than usual, moved more lavender than any 4 days prior, reorganized her stall twice, and on the 3rd day made the strategic error of mentioning to Aldrich, casually in passing, that the hooded man hadn't been around. Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. He said. "I was just noting it," she said. He said again, with considerably more content. And then on the 4th day she looked up to find the man standing at her stall again, and before she could stop herself she said, "I thought you left." He looked at her steadily. Something moved behind his eyes, something careful. "I had obligations," he said. "I came back." "You don't have to," she said. "Come back. You're not. I'm not keeping track." The careful thing in his expression settled into something that was not quite amusement and not quite warmth but contained both, the way a door contains a room. "I know," he said. "I came back anyway." She sold him a bundle of chamomile. "Good for anxiety," she said, and he took the information without deflecting it, which was another small thing she filed away without meaning to. But the morning was about to take a turn she wasn't ready for, and this is the part I need you to understand before it happens. What she thought this was, in those weeks, was a flirtation. The particular low-stakes, never-resolving kind that a market generates naturally, a small bright thing in the margins of a hard life. Something that cost nothing because it went nowhere. She thought she understood what it was and what it wasn't. She thought she was managing it. She was not managing it. It was the 13th visit when it happened, when the assumption the story had been building cracked open and showed something else underneath. Not the assumption you might be thinking. Pay attention. He had come later than usual. Mid-morning, the heat already building, the market louder and more compressed. She had almost sold out of lavender, which was good. She had been watching for him, which she had stopped, pretending to herself that she hadn't been doing. He appeared at the edge of the lane, and she felt the specific small relief of it, which she noted and set aside for later self-examination. He came to her stall. He looked at what she had left, and then something drew both their attentions at the same moment. A sound, a sharp crack, from 2 stalls down. One of the bread vendor's shelving boards had given way. Aldrich's displays, stacked too high for the warped wood, collapsed outward. Not a disaster, not an injury, but a sudden chaos of loaves across the lane, several of them rolling directly underfoot in the thickening crowd. And Aldrich himself, red-faced, making the particular sound of a man whose morning has just become significantly worse. Without thinking, Yvain stepped out from behind her stall. She picked up 3 loaves. She handed 2 to an older woman who'd been displaced by the collapse. She moved back toward Aldrich's stall, and as she did, she nearly stepped directly into the hooded man, who had moved at the exact same moment in the exact same direction, with an armful of recovered bread. They stopped, a breath apart, close enough that she could smell. Not sweat, not the market's familiar overlay of fish and smoke and trampled herb, something else, cold stone and pine resin, and something that had no name she knew but registered in the back of her throat, as serious, as old, as far larger than this narrow lane between stalls. She filed that away too. Later. "You're helping," she said. "So are you," he said. "You didn't have to." He looked at her, directly, which he did carefully and not often, she had noticed. "Neither did you," he said. And this is the moment where everything the story has told you so far crumbles slightly. Because the viewer who has been watching this knows what the heroine doesn't. You've been sitting with the question of who he is, and I've let you wonder. And now I am going to tell you something that changes the angle on every scene that came before it. There were 2 guards. You would not have noticed them, and Yvain certainly didn't. They were too good at their work for that. They stood 30 feet apart in the market crowd, dressed as tradesmen, with the particular stillness of men who are always watching and have learned to do it while appearing to watch nothing. And one of them, Brecht, square-jawed, with a thin braid running over his left shoulder that marked him as a captain of the Royal Guard. One of them had been watching this exchange with an expression that was equal parts professional tension and something that looked unsettlingly like relief. He had been watching his king stand in a market lane and hand bread to a red-nosed vendor for the 13th consecutive visit, and something in the captain's bearing had quietly, carefully rearranged itself. Like a man who had been afraid of something and was beginning to believe it might not come to pass. And the king, because yes, that's what I'm telling you, yes, the king was watching Yvain carry bread back to Aldrich's stall, and his face, in the moment before he composed it again, held an expression that was not complicated at all, which was, for a man who wore complication the way he wore that hood, the most complicated thing about it. His name was Reinhard, of the House Vetheran, Alpha King of the Korath territories and 3 provinces east of the mountains. He was 34 years old. He had ruled since he was 26, when his father died of a fever that took 3 weeks and left the kingdom to a young man who was capable but not ready, who had become capable and ready at significant personal cost, who had governed for 8 years with a precision that his council admired and a remove that his council worried about, and a scar from an assassination attempt in his 29th year that he had declined to hide because he had survived it and did not believe in decorating survival. He had come to Peller's Cross the first time because his master of markets had suggested he see the northern merchant district's conditions himself, in disguise, because the written reports had stopped matching the trade ledgers, and someone was either lying or incompetent. He had gone to Aldrich's stall because it was the first stall he reached, and he was cold, and he had been on horseback since before dawn. He had fumbled the bread because he had genuinely, with no prior experience, never purchased bread at a market stall in his life, and someone had laughed at him for it. The way people laugh at something that is simply, cleanly, unmistakably funny. Not at the king, not with any calculation. Just at a man who couldn't figure out bread. Directly and without apology. He had stood there for 3 seconds thinking something he couldn't name. He had walked away. He had come back 11 more times, and he had, in the privacy of his own mind, refused to examine the reason too closely. Here is what he had told himself. He was studying the market conditions. Here is what was also true. He was the only person in the Korath territories who, in the company of this woman, had not once been afraid. Not of her, specifically, of what she didn't know. He was always, in the company of people who knew. Who knew the title and the weight and the 8 years of calculated precision, who layered every exchange with the awareness of what he was and what he could do and what they needed from him. It had been so long since anyone had simply talked to him, given him correct change, told him where to put the pillow. He was not looking for a fated mate. He had long since made his accommodations with the fact that he might not find one. The bond had not called, not in 8 years of searching, not across 3 provinces and 100 formal introductions. He had accepted that. He was not prone to sentiment about it. He was a practical man, and he had stood in a market lane with an armful of displaced bread, 30 feet from his captain's careful, watchful relief, and he had looked at a woman who didn't know his name, who had mocked him and sold him herbs, and told him where to put the pillow. And he had felt something in his chest that was not the bond, not yet. Something adjacent to it. Something that had no formal name in any text he'd read on the subject. He was going to have to stop coming to the market. He knew that. He came back twice more. The second to last time was a Tuesday, cold again, and she had a bruise on her right wrist that she was hoping no one noticed. He noticed. He said nothing, but he arranged his position at the counter so that the bruise was on the far side from him, and he understood, from the way her shoulders settled fractionally when he did this, that she had noticed him noticing and had understood the care in it. "My mother dropped the pot again," she said, without being asked. "How is she?" he said. She looked at him. He had never asked after her mother before. She had mentioned her mother twice, once in passing, once indirectly, and he had not forgotten. "Stubborn," she said. "Good," he said. The last time was a Friday. It was warmer. The market was loud and dense, and she was in the middle of an argument with the spice woman 2 stalls down about a shared drainage issue that had been festering for weeks, and she was using the low, controlled voice she used when she was genuinely angry and knew that raising volume would not help her. He stood at the edge of her stall and waited. He did not interrupt. He did not fidget. He waited with the patience of a man who has spent 8 years in council chambers where losing patience is a form of losing everything. When the argument reached its grudging, unresolved pause, and the spice woman retreated, Yvain turned to find him standing there. She put both hands flat on the counter. She exhaled through her nose. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. "The drainage is your problem as much as hers. You were right." She blinked. "You were listening to the whole thing." "I had nowhere else to be," he said, which was technically, in the most profound possible sense, a lie. He had 3 council dispatches, a border negotiation, and a meeting with his master of grain that was already an hour overdue. Brecht, 30 feet away, had the expression of a man who was going to require significant reassurance that his job still existed. And here is what happened. Not romantic, not elaborate. She reached under the counter. She pulled out the half loaf she'd been keeping for her own lunch, her own bread, her own meal, the one she'd been planning since morning, and she set it on the counter between them. "Split with me," she said. "You still don't know how to buy the right amount." He looked at the bread. He looked at her. The careful thing in his expression, the thing that contained the door, opened just slightly, just for a moment before he gathered it back. "I buy too much," he said, Or not enough? Yes, she said, you do. He reached out and broke the bread, exactly in half. He kept his peace and left her half on the counter. He ate standing at the stall, not leaning on it, maintaining that careful distance that she had begun to learn the shape of. They didn't talk. The market noise moved around them. Someone argued. A cartwheel broke. A child screamed about something and then stopped. She thought, I don't know your name. She didn't say it. She wasn't sure why. It felt oddly like asking might cost something she didn't want to spend yet. This is what I want you to hold on to. Not the bread specifically. Not the bread as a symbol or a gesture or a romance novel moment. Although it was all of those things. What I want you to hold is the understanding of what changed in that moment and why. The title of this story is about a woman who laughed at a stranger. And yes, the laugh was what drew him back. The laugh was the first real thing he'd encountered in years, the first response that wasn't calculated, the first moment anyone had simply reacted to him as a man who couldn't figure out bread rather than as an entity that required management. But here is the reversal. He did not come back for the laugh, or he came back for the laugh first. Yes, and then he stayed for something else. He stayed because she laughed at him, and then, 2 visits later, came to find him at Aldrich's stall at the end of the morning, and held out a small piece of bread she'd bought with her own coin, and said, with the minimum possible ceremony, I was rude to you, last week. I shouldn't have laughed. Not effusive. Not excessive. Just true, said clearly without theater. He had stood there looking at the bread she was offering, this woman who had 4 coins in a purse, and a mother with a bad ankle, and 12 lavender bundles to sell. And she was offering him bread that cost her something real, and an apology that cost her more, and she wasn't asking him for anything in return, and she wasn't performing the apology for an audience, and she had no idea, who he was. That was when. Not the laugh. What came after it? The kindness that follows a mistake. That was the thing he couldn't name, couldn't stop returning to, couldn't explain to Brecht or to himself, or to the council meeting he was consistently, disastrously late for. She had mocked him, and she had come back to face it, and she had offered him bread. And she had no idea who he was. He had been coming back ever since to find out if it would stay true. If she would stay true. If the person who did that small, costly, unnecessary thing was the same person every morning. Or if it had been an anomaly, a fluke, a single good moment in an otherwise ordinary character. 13 visits. She had been the same every time, occasionally sharper than was comfortable, occasionally funnier than was safe. Once visibly tired and still showing up, once wrong in the drainage argument and not correcting herself, which was a flaw she had, a mild stubbornness about admitting mid-stride errors, and which he had noted with something very close to relief, because a person with no flaws is a person who is performing, and he had spent 8 years surrounded by performance. He had been going to stop coming. He had decided that 4 times. He kept not stopping, and now they were eating bread together in the market at noon, in the particular silence of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the space between them. And Yvain looked up and said, without planning to, Will you tell me your name? The question sat in the air between them. He held his bread. He looked at her, not with the careful composure he usually held, but with something underneath it. Something that looked, for just a moment, exactly like someone being given a choice they'd been avoiding. Rain, he said. Not a lie, not precisely. A portion of the truth offered like the bread, in half. He watched her accept it. Yvain, she said. I know, he said. She narrowed her eyes. How do you know? Aldrich, he said. Which was true, technically. Aldrich had introduced them in Aldrich's way, which was to announce across the lane on the 9th visit. Rain, this is Yvain, Reen. Now can someone help me with this awning, it's killing me. She absorbed this. She went back to her bread. Something had shifted. She could feel it, the way the air in a room changes when something has been said that can't be unsaid. even if what was said was only a name. Particularly if what was said was only a name. The morning after the bread, he did not come. The morning after that, he did not come. She told herself it was fine. It was fine, people had lives. He had obligations, he'd said so. She had obligations, her mother, the lavender, the 4 coins that needed to be 7. She was not going to notice his absence with the specific particular ache of someone who has let a small, bright thing matter too much. She noticed it. On the 3rd day, she was short with Aldrich and apologized immediately, which was unlike her, and he looked at her with the expression that communicated volumes without words, and went back to his bread and said nothing because he was, for all his bluster, a decent man. On the 4th day, she told herself, if he comes back, ask his name again, his real name. Something is wrong in the half she got. On the 5th day, the market changed. She heard it before she understood it. A shift in the ambient noise. The market's consistent, chaotic hum dropping into something different. A hush that moved through the crowd like a stone, dropped into water. Ripples of quiet spreading outward from the market's main entrance at the south end of Peller's Cross. She stood up on the step behind her stall to see. Riders, 6 of them in formation. Then, 12 more, flanking something. Someone. At the center. A horse that was 3 hands taller than anything else in the lane. And astride it, a man in riding clothes that were black and close-fitted, and had nothing of disguise about them. A man who held himself the way only a certain kind of man holds himself in public, the specific geometry of someone who has spent their entire life being looked at, and learned to make the looking cost the looker something. His hood was down. She saw the jaw first, strong, shaved close, and then the scar. From beneath the left ear to the corner of the mouth. The full length of it in broad morning light, nothing obscuring it, and below the scar, at the collar of his riding clothes, not wool, nothing ordinary about the fabric, that same dark weight that caught the light differently, that had been sitting at the edge of her attention for weeks. The market was silent now, actually silent. Every vendor, every customer, every passing cart driver, silent. Yvain stood on her step with both hands flat on the counter of her stall and watched Reinhard of House Vetherin ride through Peller's Cross with 12 guards and a horse the size of a small building, and felt the floor of every assumption she'd been standing on simply fall away. Not dramatically, not with any noise, just gone. Aldrich appeared at her elbow. He said, very quietly, the voice of a man who has just remembered 13 mornings in a row with perfect, horrible clarity. Yvain. Yes, she said. That is. Yes, she said again. The procession had stopped. Not because of the crowd. The crowd was already parting, efficiently, in the way crowds part for things that frighten them. It had stopped because the man on the tall horse had turned his head with the slow, inexorable movement of something used to knowing exactly where it wants to look, and he had looked directly at her. From this distance, she could not read his expression. She knew the shape of it, had learned the shape of it over 13 mornings, but there was something different in it now. A weight she'd never seen before. The weight of a man who has made a choice he knew was wrong and is standing in the consequence of it. She did not look away. He held her gaze for what felt like a very long time. It was probably 3 seconds. She was past being able to count them. Then he rode on, south through the market, gone. She got down off the step. She sat down on the stools behind her stall. She put her hands in her lap. Aldrich put a cup of water in front of her from somewhere. She didn't drink it. She sat there and listened to the market slowly, haltingly, reluctantly resume its noise around her, like an animal testing whether the danger has passed. Here is what she thought. Not in order. Not cleanly, she thought. The bread. The 3 silver marks for a 1 silver loaf. The patience while she argued with the spice woman. The specific, quiet care with which he had arranged himself so that her bruised wrist was on the far side. The lavender. Both, usually. She thought. He knew. He always knew. Not just his name, everything. The whole structure of it, the real geography of who he was and where he sat in the world. And he had withheld it, morning after morning, bread after bread, name after name. She thought, Reen. She thought, I offered him an apology and my lunch. He is an alpha king. He ate my lunch, she thought. And this one landed harder than the others, settled deeper, because it was the thought with the most edges. She thought, he came back, not once, 13 times, for bread and chamomile, and a woman who told him where to put the pillow. She did not know what to do with that. She genuinely, sitting on her stool in the middle of a resuming market, did not know what to do with a king who came back 13 times for bread. She worked the rest of the day with automatic efficiency and no memory of it afterward. She sold the remaining lavender. She got the 7 coins. She went home. Her mother looked at her face when she came in and said, with the directness of a woman who has been a mother long enough to dispense with ceremony, "What happened?" "I laughed at the Alpha King," Yvain said, "and then I gave him half my lunch." A pause. Her mother, whose name was Senna, who had dark eyes and a streak of silver through her hair that had come in at 30 and stayed, who was sitting with her ankle wrapped and elevated on a cushion, looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Was the lunch good?" she said. "It was bread," Yvain said. Said Senna. "Exactly like Aldrich." Yvain noticed this. She thought about the particular solidarity of people who love you and refuse to make your life easier when you are being obtuse. She lay awake that night and told herself the logical things. He was a king. She was a market stall. Those were not equivalent positions in any political, social, or practical sense, and the fact that they had eaten bread together in a market lane on a warm Friday did not constitute a relationship, a claim, an expectation, or anything that she had any right to grieve the absence of. She had known him for 13 mornings. She had not known him at all, in one very specific and significant sense, since she had not known who he was. Although, and this was the edge that kept catching, although, was that true, she had known him. She had known where to put the counter so the bruise was protected. She had known the pause before the smile and the door that contained the room, and the voice that assumed it would be heard without needing to be loud. She had known he was carrying something, because the lavender is for grief or sleep, she'd told him, and he'd said both, usually, and meant it. She had known something true about him. She just hadn't known his name. She fell asleep, finally, near dawn, on the thought that was the most inconvenient of all. She was going to have to decide, in the cold light of morning, if she was angry because he'd deceived her or because the version of him she'd known in the market, careful, contained, returning, had been real, and knowing that made everything else harder, not easier. She was angry about both. She was going to have to decide which one mattered more. She got up. She packed her lavender. She went to the market. He was there, not in the procession format, not the 12 guards and the tall horse. He was standing at the edge of her stall in his riding clothes. Still the good fabric, still nothing of disguise about it now, no hood, no pretense, with a single guard standing 20 feet back, and the market around him doing the thing that markets do around concentrated power, which is to simultaneously pretend not to notice and arrange themselves to have clear sight lines. She stopped in the lane. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment that was probably shorter than it felt. "You lied to me," she said, not loud, flat. "I gave you my name," he said. Part of it, she repeated. "Right. I withheld the rest," he said. "I know. For 13 mornings. Yes." She set her basket down on the counter. She began unpacking her lavender with the focused precision of someone who needs their hands to be doing something while their brain does something else. He waited. He was, she had learned, extremely good at waiting. "Why?" she said to the lavender, not to him. "Because," he said, and then stopped, and she heard him take a breath that was slower than his usual breathing. I had forgotten what it felt like to be simply wrong about something, to fumble bread and have someone laugh at it. Not at the king. At the fumbling. A pause. I didn't want to give it up. She stopped unpacking. Her hands went still. That is, she said carefully, a very selfish reason. Yes, he said, it is. She appreciated that he didn't argue with it. She was a person who lost respect for people who didn't acknowledge true things about themselves, and she was taking inventory of everything she knew about this man and recategorizing it, and she needed him not to make it harder by being defensive. You could have told me, she said. I know. I didn't. I would have. She stopped. She wasn't sure, actually, how that sentence ended. She would have what? Acted differently? Probably. Been less herself? Almost certainly. She thought about every exchange in those 13 mornings. The argument she'd won, the bread she'd split, the apology she'd offered, and she thought about whether any of those things would have happened the same way if she'd known. They wouldn't have. She was self-aware enough to admit that. She hated that she was self-aware enough to admit that. If I'd known, she said, I wouldn't have laughed at the bread. No, he said. You wouldn't have. So you were protecting the conditions for the thing you wanted, she said, which was my honesty, by being dishonest. A long pause. He said, yes, that's accurate. That's, she said, and then didn't finish the sentence, because several words applied and none of them were adequate. He reached into his coat. He put something on her counter. She looked down. A small square of folded paper. She picked it up and unfolded it. Inside, in handwriting that was precise and slightly angular, and belonged to a man who had been writing dispatches since he was 16. The name. His full name. Both houses. All 3 provincial titles. And below it, in smaller letters. I am aware this is insufficient. It is what I have. She refolded the paper. She put it in her pocket. The guard 20 feet back had the expression of a man watching his king do something unprecedented, and having made the professional decision not to interfere. I'm angry at you, she said. I know. I'm not finished being angry. I know that too, he said. She picked up a bundle of lavender. She set it on the counter between them, not offering it to him, not putting it away, just setting it there, in the space between them, as a marker of something unresolved. Come back tomorrow, she said. He looked at the lavender. He looked at her, and something in his face, for just a moment, was not the careful composure, and not the door, and not the weight of 8 years and 3 provinces, and a scar from a knife meant to kill him. It was simpler than all of that. It was the face of a man who had been coming back for 13 mornings and had not been certain, when he rode through that market yesterday, if there would be a 14th. Yes, he said. He came back. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and none of those mornings were easy, because Yvain was not a person who made things easy, and he was not a person for whom easy was a mode he trusted anyway. She asked him hard questions. He answered them as accurately as he could, which was not always completely. She told him when she thought he was being evasive, and he told her when she was being stubborn, and they were wrong about each other occasionally, in ways that required acknowledgement and correction, which happened with the gruff efficiency of 2 people who had both grown up, learning that stubbornness is only useful when it's pointed at the right problem. The market watched all of this with avid, barely contained fascination. Aldrich, who was a decent man and also a man with an instinct for commercial opportunity, raised the price of his bread by half a silver and claimed atmospheric costs. Brecht, the captain with the braid over his left shoulder, had 2 more guards discreetly repositioned to better coverage angles, filed a report noting irregular market protocol, ongoing, no security incidents, and did not mention it to anyone who might make him stop. Senna, whose ankle healed over those weeks, and who began coming to the market occasionally on the arm of a neighbor, watched a king stand at her daughter's stall in his riding clothes without a hood, and eat bread and argue about drainage, and once, on a cold morning, say something that made Yvain laugh. Actually laugh. The unguarded, involuntary kind, the kind that had started everything. And Senna held her expression very carefully, because she was a woman who knew what things were worth and did not want to cheapen this one by reacting to it too, obviously. The thing about the bond, the formal thing, the alpha bond, the thing Reinhard had spent 8 years in 3 provinces and 100 formal introductions looking for, is that it does not announce itself with drama. He had been expecting drama, in the way you expect something you've built up into myth over years of disappointment. He had been expecting to know, to feel it the way the old texts described, a certainty arriving whole, a click of recognition that left no room for doubt. What happened instead was a Tuesday, cold, late in the season, and he was standing at the counter of her stall, watching her wrap the last of the lavender bundles, while she told him something about the Spice Woman's new drainage proposal. With the animated exasperation of someone who genuinely cared about drainage. Because it was her lane, too, and she tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face with one ink-stained finger. She had been doing the market accounts that morning. Her left hand bore the evidence, and he thought, with no fanfare at all, there it is. Not dramatic, not a click. Just a small, quiet recognition, like finally placing a sound you've been half hearing for weeks. Like bread. Like it was always going to be this. He did not say anything immediately. He was a practical man. He had a council meeting. But he stood there for 2 more minutes listening to her views on drainage, with the specific attention of a man who is trying to memorize something. The way she held herself when she was making a point, the ink stain, the strand of hair, the voice that moved between sharp and warm, so fast you had to pay attention, or you'd miss the transition. "You're not listening," she said. "I am," he said. "I heard everything about the drainage." She looked at him sideways. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Like what?" he said. She studied him for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not alarmed, not soft. Something that had more to do with knowing. With having been paying close attention herself and having noticed something in the last 30 seconds that she was going to need to sit with. Like you figured something out, He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have." Another pause. The market moved around them. Someone called out a price. A cart went by. "Are you going to tell me?" she said. "Not yet," he said. "I need to do something first." She narrowed her eyes. "You know I hate that." "I know," he said. "Give me 2 days." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she pointed at him with a lavender bundle. 2 days, she said. "And then whatever you've figured out, you say it plainly, not in a folded piece of paper." "Yes," he said, plainly. He left. He rode back through the south gate of Peller's Cross, with Brecht at his side, and Brecht, with the tact of a captain who has survived 8 years by knowing exactly when to speak and when not to, said nothing for a full 3 minutes. Then he said, carefully, "Your Majesty, the council." "I know," Reinhard said. "They're going to ask. They're going to ask a great many things," Reinhard said. "I'll handle them." A pause. "She's a market vendor," Brecht said, not unkindly, with the tone of a man who is doing his job. "She is," Reinhard said. "She's also the only person in the Korath territories who has ever given me correct change and told me I was wrong when I was wrong, and apologized when she thought she'd been unfair, and not asked me for a single thing in return." He paused, in that order, in public. Brecht processed this. "And the bond?" he said. "Yes," Reinhard said, "that too." Brecht was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, lost the careful professionalism, found something quieter underneath. 8 years, he said. 8 years, Reinhard agreed. They rode on. The council did ask. They asked with varying degrees of diplomacy. 2 of them were actually diplomatic. 3 were concerned in the way of people who have practical stakes in the succession. And 1, a woman named Countess Viere, with silver rings on every finger of her left hand, asked with the flat precision of someone who has been managing difficult men for 40 years and has simply run out of cushioning. A market vendor, she said. Yes, Reinhard said. Unelite, unknown family, no political value. None of those things concern me, he said. They concern the council, she said. I know, he said. The council will adjust. She held his gaze for a long moment. She had served his father and she had served him, and she was the only member of the council who ever told him the truth when the truth was inconvenient, which made her, in his private hierarchy, the most valuable person in the room. She looked at him, not at the king, at the man, which she was one of perhaps 4 people alive who could still do. And she said, Is she the bond? Yes, he said. A pause. And the rest of it? Viore said. He understood what she was asking. The bond was one thing. It was formal, legible, it had precedent. The rest of it, the 13 mornings, the bread, the lavender for grief or sleep, the apology that cost something. The rest of it was not legible and had no precedent and sat in the space between formal acknowledgement and whatever word you use for a thing that matters to you in a way you can't govern. The rest of it, too, he said. Viore looked at him for another moment. Then she turned to the council and began the process of moving on, with the efficiency of a woman who knows which battles are already decided and saves her energy for the ones that aren't. 2 days. He had said 2 days. He went back. He walked through the market without the 12 guards, just Brecht, at distance, without the riding clothes that announced everything, in something plain and dark that was still clearly not the hooded disguise, and still clearly not a man who needed to pretend to be anything. He walked to her stall. She was there. She had seen him coming for the last 20 stalls, and had arranged her face with the care of someone who was trying not to show relief, which told him she had spent the last 2 days somewhat similarly to how he had spent them. He stood at the counter. Plainly, she said. Yes, he said, and then, with the minimum possible elaboration, with the precision of a man who has had 8 years to think about what this would mean, and still finds the sentence too large for its words, the bond called, for you. She looked at him. Steady. He watched her take the information in, the way he had seen her take in market information. Efficiently, without theater, with the particular stillness of someone deciding how much to trust what they're hearing. You're certain, she said. Yes, when? Tuesday. You were explaining the drainage. Something moved across her face that she couldn't quite contain. A flash of something that was almost amusement, and wasn't, that lived in the same country as the laugh that had started everything. The drainage, she said. The drainage, he said. A pause. She looked at her lavender. She looked at him. She said, I'm still angry at you. I know. About the lying, about the name. Yes, I know. That doesn't go away because of the bond, she said. That's not how it works. No, he said. It doesn't. And I'm not asking it to. She held his gaze. He held hers. The market moved around them, efficient, indifferent, ongoing. And she stood behind her counter with ink on her left hand and dried lavender stems on her apron and the expression of a woman who is doing arithmetic of a kind that has no numbers in it. She reached under the counter. She brought out bread. Not her own lunch this time. She had planned this, had gone to Aldrich before opening, had gotten a full loaf this time, one that had been set aside and was still warm from the morning's first batch. She put it on the counter between them. Tell me something true, she said. He looked at the bread. He looked at her. The scar, he said, is from a knife, not a war, someone I trusted. He paused. I don't trust easily. I know, she said. I've noticed. And yet, he said, looking at the bread. Here, she agreed. She broke the bread. He took his half. They ate standing at the counter of her stall, in the middle of Peller's Cross Market, with Brecht 20 feet away, and Aldrich doing his absolute best not to stare, and the spice woman 2 stalls down, having completely abandoned pretense and simply watching with open interest, and the morning sun working its way above the rooftops, in the slow, indifferent way of morning sun that has no opinion about kings or market vendors or the particular mathematics of trust. The weeks that followed were not simple. I want to be honest about that, because the story that only has the arrival and not the adjusting is the story that doesn't quite tell you the truth. There were conversations with the council that were difficult. There were mornings in the market that had an audience now. Curious, occasionally unkind, the particular scrutiny that attaches to a woman who has come from nowhere and is going somewhere people think she hasn't earned. She encountered, twice, women who smiled at her with the specific warmth of people who want something and believe flattery is the fastest route to it. She encountered, once, a man who told her, with professional courtesy, that her mother's debt on the market stall had been quietly absorbed, and who then waited to be thanked in a way that would obligate her, and who encountered instead Yvain's flat gaze and her polite, inflexible refusal to have debts absorbed on her behalf without her prior agreement. She told Reinhard about it that evening. He listened. Then he said, "Who sent him?" He didn't say, but the way he was standing when I turned him down. She thought about it. He was surprised, like he wasn't used to people saying no. "Most of my counsel isn't," he said. "I noticed," she said. "They need practice." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the fractional shift at the corner of his mouth that she had learned to read as the thing that thought about becoming a smile, "They are going to find you very difficult." "Good," she said. "There is one more thing that needs to be told, and it is the thing that the secondary question, the one I planted in the middle of the story, the one I told you would only resolve at the end. It is the thing that answers that question." The question was this: what happened to the people who had dismissed her? This needs a small step back. In the market, in the weeks before Reinhard's identity broke open, there had been a particular group of vendors in the upper row, the cloth merchants, the luxury goods dealers, the sort of stalls that understood their proximity to the high-end buyers who came in from the city proper. They had been, in their way, a small aristocracy of commerce, and they had, in their way, found Yvain's stall, the lavender and the chamomile, the good prices stall in the middle row, the girl with the ink-stained hands and the mother with the bad ankle, worth approximately nothing. Not cruelty specifically. The particular, ordinary dismissal of people who have decided your category. There was one who was more specific than the rest. A woman named Orla, who ran the cloth stall directly above Yvain's lane, who had the neat white hands of someone who touches fine fabric all day and a way of looking past you that was so consistent it had to be practiced. Orla had told Yvain, on 2 separate occasions, that she might want to consider moving her stall to the lower market, and here she had smiled, with the warm warmth of performed courtesy, where the herbal sellers were tended to cluster. Yvain had declined, pleasantly. Orla had told a merchant acquaintance that the market girls in the middle row were becoming ambitious, the way you say ambitious when you mean something else. She had said this in mid-autumn. In early winter, she stood in her cloth stall and watched the alpha king of the Korath territories eat bread at Yvain's counter and found for the first time in many years that she had absolutely nothing to say. She did not grovel. Real life rarely produces groveling. What it produced, instead, was this. 2 weeks later, Orla approached Yvain's stall with a piece of cloth, high quality, winter weight, and set it on the counter and said, with the precision of someone choosing their words extremely carefully, that she thought Yvain might find it useful for the cold mornings. Yvain looked at the cloth. She looked at Orla. She understood exactly what this was and what it cost and what it was asking for. And she thought about her mother's ankle and the 4 coins that needed to be 7, and the drainage argument, and the 13 mornings, and the apology she had offered for laughing at a man fumbling bread, the apology that had cost her something real. She took the cloth. She said thank you. She did not perform forgiveness or withhold it or make it a transaction. She just received it, the way she received most things, with the economy of someone whose life has not given her the luxury of processing everything at full volume. Orla went back to her stall. It was not reconciliation. It was not warmth. It was the small, sufficient act of one person acknowledging to another person that the ground had shifted and the shift was permanent and something had to be sent to market. That was enough. That was. In the mathematics, Yvain had grown up doing exactly the right amount. The drainage issue was resolved in the spring, by the way. The city administrators were, suddenly, very interested in the infrastructure of Peller's Cross Market. Yvain had strong views. She was heard. Aldrich claimed credit for the final design, and she let him have it because the result was what mattered, and Aldrich had grandchildren to impress. And in the mornings, in the ordinary ongoing mornings that are the actual substance of a life, Reinhard came to the market when he could. Not every day. The same irregular pattern that had maddened her in autumn, which she now understood was not caprice, but the rhythm of a man with 3 provinces, and a border negotiation, and a council that required constant management. But he came, and on the mornings he came, he stood at her counter, and they argued and agreed and ate bread, and she told him when he was wrong, and he told her when she was being stubborn about the wrong things, and occasionally something she said made that shift at the corner of his mouth reach all the way to a smile, which was, in the economy of this particular man, worth considerable more than other men's laughter. She kept her stall. She had considered not keeping it. There had been offers. There had been transitions available to her. There had been comfortable things that would have removed the lavender and the lavender-stained apron and the 4 coins, and replaced them with something that looked more like what people expected of a woman in her position. She had declined with the same pleasant inflexibility she applied to absorbed debts. The stall was hers. She had built it. The market knew her name, and not because of him, and that was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the thing she had decided she was not willing to lose, even for a king. Particularly for a king. He understood that. He had, perhaps, understood it before she articulated it, which was one of the things about him she was still learning to receive. The way he held space for the things she needed before she knew she needed to ask. It was a good quality. It was also occasionally infuriating, because she was a person who liked to arrive at her own understanding in her own time, and having someone already there could feel like rushing. "You knew I'd keep the stall," she said to him once. "I hoped you would," he said. "Why?" He thought about it. Because the woman who gave half her bread to a stranger didn't do it to impress anyone. If she gave up the thing that was hers, she'd be giving it up for the wrong reasons, and then it would cost something. She was quiet for a moment. "You think about these things," she said. "I have a long ride from the keep to the market," he said. "It's 40 minutes. Long enough," he said. "Now it is late in the season again. A full year from where this started. The morning light at Peller's Cross in autumn comes in at a particular angle through the gap between the dye merchant's awning and the Spice woman's new and significantly improved drainage infrastructure, and it lands every morning for exactly 20 minutes in mid-morning on the middle stalls of the lane in a way that is genuinely warm and genuinely brief. Yvain has learned to work in it while it lasts. She is unpacking lavender when she hears the market's ambient noise shift. Not the dramatic hush of the procession, not the 12 guards, just the small, collective awareness that moves through a crowd when something they've been watching for weeks finally arrives. She does not look up immediately. She finishes what she's doing. She arranges the last bundle. Then she looks up. He is at the edge of her stall. No hood, no pretense. Exactly the fabric that catches the light differently, the scar clear in the morning sun, the hands with their knuckle scars braced on the edge of her counter in the way she has learned means he is not going anywhere. He has something in his other hand, a loaf of bread. She looks at the bread. She looks at him. "You're still buying too much," she says. "Or not enough," he says. "Give it here," she says, and holds out her hand. He puts the bread in her palm. Their fingers don't quite touch. And then they do, the briefest press of warm against warm. And she feels something she has felt before but has not yet finished learning to feel. Not the bond specifically, which she has her own relationship with and her own terms for, but the weight of a thing that is real. That was real before she knew his name and has stayed real through the knowing. That will, she thinks, continue to be real in the difficult ongoing way of things that are worth it. She breaks the bread. She keeps her half. She gives him his. And across the lane, Aldrich, decent man, missing thumbnail. 3 silver marks richer in his worldview than he was a year ago. Looks at the two of them, and looks away, and does not say a single thing. He doesn't have to. The bread is broken. The morning light lasts exactly as long as it lasts. And somewhere in the geometry of a market lane, a scar catches the autumn sun, and a woman with ink on her hands eats her half without looking up. Without ceremony, without performance, without asking permission, because she is, and has always been, exactly enough.